imposter syndrome is a type of shame that says, I don't belong, right? There's something fundamental about me, my knowledge, my brain, that I don't feel like I'm really worthy of this position that I'm in. And because of that, I need to hide because when you have imposter syndrome, your drive is, I don't want them to know or see or find out. And the way that we keep that knowledge from getting out, these lies that shame tells us, is to not speak up all the time, right? Is to keep quiet.
When was the last time that you sat in a meeting, a question was posed, you knew the answer, and you minimized it, or worse yet, did not say anything at all? We typically call that imposter syndrome, and then we move on. My name is Rosie Zilinskas, creator of the Articulation Gap for high-performing corporate women. My guest today says that we have been using the term imposter syndrome incorrectly this whole time. Dr. Zoe Shaw is a licensed psychotherapist with a doctorate in clinical psychology and has been practicing for more than 20 years. She wrote the book called Stronger in the Difficult Places. Her specialty is shame. Dr. Zoe stated that imposter syndrome is not a quirk of high achievers. Instead, she says, it is shame. And shame has exactly one job: to make you hide. Dr. Zoe gets practical about how you can stop shame. So let's get started. Dr. Zoe, thank you so much for being here with me today. We are going to be talking about a lot of ways that women can advance in the corporate space. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Rosie. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you. So, as you well know, a lot of women are in the corporate world and they are trying to figure out how to be seen, how to make themselves visible because their accomplishments may not be valued. And not that they're not valuable, it's just that they're not able to explain to maybe their boss or senior management how they're able to add to the organization throughout, with their skills and their knowledge. And you and I had a pre-call and we're talking about women hiding. And, sometimes people feel shame. And you actually said to me that imposter syndrome is one of those things that shame shows up. So first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience with shame and how does imposter syndrome show up as shame?
Well, I'd almost say that imposter syndrome is shame. It's just a
Okay,
type of shame.
got it.
Yeah. I'm a psychotherapist and I've been in practice for a couple of decades, I believe 25 now, and 25 years, not decades. Um, I have been really passionate about understanding shame and in my process, because I have my own shame story. And in the process, I realized that I and many of my clients have a different type of shame than Brene Brown talks about, the type of shame that
Mm.
I now call simple shame that is alleviated by vulnerability and external compassion. Some people have a type of shame that's not alleviated by that. And when they attempt to get that and they don't receive that external compassion, their shame just kind of spirals deeper. Or when they do receive the external compassion, the way that their shame is set up in their body doesn't isn't able to receive the external compassion. And it's because of what I call the complex process of their shame. Um, and so when we look at the types of shame, there are lots of different types of shame. And today we can talk about imposter syndrome, which is,
Mhm.
and so if we think about the purpose of shame, the purpose of shame is to make us hide. And so let me explain what that means and what that looks like. Um, a lot of people confuse guilt and shame, and some people have already heard this and understand the difference, but many people don't really. And so guilt is an emotion and in some ways a brain state and can be a body state that tells us I've done something to break my moral code. It's attached to behavior. I've done something. break my moral code. And the thing is that with guilt, we can do something with that. We can make repairs, we can apologize, we can choose, I'm not going to do that anymore. And so
Mhm.
healthy guilt, which tells the truth, is good for us. Now, we do have, especially women, sometimes we have mommy guilt, we have some guilt that's not valid, but it's usually not attached to, I've done something to break my moral code. And so that's how you can tell the difference between healthy guilt and not healthy guilt.
Hmm.
Though, shame says I am wrong. There's something fundamentally wrong about me. And when we have that feeling, that brain state, there's nothing for us to do but hide and or try to run from ourselves, which doesn't work very well, right? And so
Yeah.
shame, in my professional opinion, is not a healthy emotion. Because the only purpose of shame is to make us hide. And when we hide in relationships, when we hide in our parenting, when we hide at work, which is imposter syndrome, we're not able to live up to our full potential. We're not able to experience love. We're not able to experience all that we should be experiencing as humans, right? And
Mhm.
so imposter syndrome is a type of shame that says, I don't belong, right? There's something fundamental about me, my knowledge, my brain, that I don't feel like I'm really worthy of this position that I'm in. And because of that, I need to hide because when you have imposter syndrome, your drive is, I don't want them to know or see or find out. And the way that we keep that knowledge from getting out, these lies that shame tells us, is to not speak up all the time, right? Is to keep quiet, it's to do things that in many ways keep us from being seen in the workplace, even though we know on a logical basis that what we need to do is step up, is speak out, is talk. But when we have imposter syndrome, it's impeding that. It sabotages us.
Mm. And that is why so many women, they're doing a fantastic job and they have the skills and they have the knowledge, but they don't have, and that's what I work with a lot with my clients, just and I call it crafting your script. What phrase are you going to use when someone surprises you and says, hey, can you take on this project last minute? Or when you're trying to have your mid-year performance review and you're trying to show them, kind of like when we were kids and show the math, like why should you be the person to, get this particular promotion? But there is this barrier that women are trying to cross of just simply showing and explaining how they can solve problems for their organization. And I think that to me is, or let me ask you, is that a symptom of hiding? Because what would what would prevent someone from being able to explain how they bring value to, an organization?
Yes, so I would say that's absolutely a symptom of imposter syndrome. And what we have to understand, especially with women, especially in the corporate environment, is that we still have all of these sociocultural messages about
Mhm.
men, about what it means for a woman to lead, about what it means for a woman to speak up, to put herself out there. And the reality is, men just do not experience as much imposter syndrome in the corporate world as women do. In fact, I mean, what we know is that men will, in many ways, uh, over kind of describe their ability. They will
Mhm.
speak up when they don't even necessarily know what they're talking about, way
Yeah.
more than women will. And what we also know is that women use a lot more hedging words. And one of the things, just behaviorally, and we can talk about that next time, is what we can do with the way that we speak. And we can talk about that next time. That can help us do two things. One, it helps us appear different when we're speaking to other people, and it also helps shore us up individually. And so I don't remember what the question was, but women do tend to have more imposter syndrome in the workplace. Women do tend to use more hedging words. Women definitely have less confidence, and a lot of it is based in shame that is created through our kind of our sociology, just the world and the messages that we receive.
Got it. So it was how or why are women not able to explain their value? But you said hedging words. Can you just explain what that means for the audience?
Yes. So a hedging word is a word that says, I think, or maybe, or possibly, or something like that. We hedge instead of just saying something declaratively, like, this is happening, this is what I see, this is what it is. Most women, when they speak up, they will hedge. And part of that is just giving room for someone else to not agree with you,
Mm,
consider what you have to say, and what happens is those words lack confidence. So it's like, well, maybe, or I think. And if you pay attention to the way that men tend to uh, communicate in the boardroom, they don't tend to use hedging words. They're very clear.
mm,
And so but the question was is why. So the why is the reality of how we as women are taught to and socialized to speak about ourselves in general. And we can't just cut that off when we show up at the workplace, when we show up in the corporate world. We are encouraged to be kind and quiet and nurturing.
mhm.
We are encouraged to help others, right? And put other people before ourselves. And we tend to continue to do that in the corporate world when it's not to our advantage. Not that we shouldn't be kind. Of course, we can be kind. But if we are always putting ourselves last, if we are always reticent to speak up because we don't want to look a certain way, then those are the things that are going to happen. And so we have to understand that yes, maybe we still want to show up in the world that way outside of our work, but inside of our work, it's a different game. And
Mhm.
being able to speak up, being able to even promote yourself, which is so much harder for women than men, is actually it's a means of self-care.
Interesting. This reminds me, and I've been telling this story, and this kind of resonates with people because my husband and I went on vacation to Glacier National Park last summer. So we're in Montana and lots of hills, lots of curves. And we were driving somewhere, and he was super tired. So I was like, you know what? Let me drive, and then you can take over after. And it was about, I don't know, like maybe 45 minutes, an hour, something like that. He fell asleep, and I'm driving, and I'm start to realize that I'm not comfortable driving, and I start white knuckling it. And the whole time I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to kill myself, my husband. And I'm like, I was just really careful. I slowed down. My speed was like at the speed limit, even slower. And at the curves, I was like slowing even more. And so finally we get to our destination, and my husband wakes up, and we're like eating, whatever. And I was like, so are you like uncomfortable driving the car in these roads? And he's like, no. I'm like, so you're 100% comfortable? He's like, yes. I'm like, so you don't think, and I asked him like 4, 5, 6 times, like, so you don't have any thought about the curves and the hills and the maybe driving off the road? He's like, what are you talking about? And that is a great example, I feel, on how women and men manage their careers, because men, they just go, and maybe life, I'm not sure, but women, we think about it, we decide, I'm like, we back off, we're careful. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm not a precautionary, like, I'm a good driver, I'm comfortable, but in that situation, I was not myself at all. So does that make sense?
Well, it makes total sense. And that's the reason why insurance is so much higher on men. They
Mm,
overestimate their ability and they overestimate their knowledge. And that shows up in the workplace and it works for them. And then
mm.
underestimate their ability and their knowledge and it shows up in the workplace and it doesn't work for us.
Yeah, yeah. So I know, so we've talked a lot about why women hide, but another thing that I think women hesitate is like when to speak up. I did a talk not too long ago, a couple weeks ago actually, and I did my signature talk. It's all about, how we sabotage ourselves. And afterwards, one of the young ladies like stood up and she was like, I don't have a problem speaking up. However, I do have a problem how my message is received. And she's like, and I'm polite and I follow all the rules, but when I say my message, it's not received well by the men. And then someone else popped up and said, yeah, and so what does that mean? Do we have to keep coddling the men, to treat us with kid gloves and things like that? So there's such a dichotomy in how women think. And also, I think men are now realizing this, and I feel for them because they're not being educated on how to navigate this. So can you enlighten us a little bit about what is happening with this situation?
Right. It's just kind of a microcosm of what goes on in the greater world, is that the reality is that women's opinions, thoughts, ideas are still devalued. And
Mm,
just continue all of that behavior, all of those mindsets. We can't remove them when we show up in the corporate world. Even though we have rules and laws and all of these things, we still show up with our mindsets and our preset ideas. And so, and then the other problem is that for women also, they get gaslit about this because it's
mm,
her to step up. It's not that easy, but she can step up and say, I'm presenting my ideas and I'm not being heard. And it's really easy for a man to say, we heard you. That's not happening, right? We considered it. And so what's happening is that her experience is valid. And we also have to understand that that experience of you speaking up as a woman and not being heard, in many ways, not consciously necessarily, but that is the weapon to keep you quiet. And so, what we have to do is when we speak up and we're not heard, we have to keep speaking and we have to expect that that is going to happen so that we can't allow even that silence or the ignoring to silence us. Because that's also what happens is women are like, well, I spoke up, nothing happened. I spoke up, nothing happened. I spoke up, nothing happened. So I'm just gonna give up.
mm. Interesting. I was reading a biography on Susan B. Anthony, and she was so passionate about women's suffrage, and I never realized that she fought for women's suffrage for 50 years, and then she passed away, and it was another 20 years before women actually got the right to vote. And so when you say like we have to keep speaking up, and someone actually did say that, how long are we going to have this conversation? I think this conversation is here until the end of time, until we are able to make sure that everybody understands that this is a mindset, and then how we socialize our daughters and our granddaughters. And, it's going to continue to go on. But on the plus side, we have improved. We do have women in government now that are well educated women, well spoken women. And I really hope that we continue to have these everyday conversations, because if one person realizes that, hey, you know what, I'm the one that's holding myself back by not continuing to ask and ask and ask until you're heard, then nothing is really going to change. What are you seeing, like when you talk to your clients or out there in the world, that we haven't really talked about that you want to showcase in this in this theme of the corporate space?
Well, I think we in the corporate space we talk a lot about behavior, about things to do, right? And that's important. But what we don't talk a lot about is mindset, is especially for women, the toxic messages that they are carrying. And so when we look at shame, when we look at imposter syndrome, and of course, I'm a shame expert. And so I'm often looking at things through the lens of shame. We have to understand that it's not just what's being put on us as women, it's also what we are carrying. what we are carrying into the workplace. And so women need to start to understand their own toxic messages that they are carrying, that they are projecting, that they're telling to themselves that keep them from speaking up, from doing, the behaviors that we know are helpful. And so, we can talk a little bit more about the practices of identifying your toxic messages, of being able to kind of untangle them from your identity. But I really feel that it's those toxic messages that we carry that are just as damaging as the things that are done to us in corporate.
Absolutely. And Dr. Zoe, I'd like for you to share with us a little bit of your story. Kind of like, how did you become a shame expert? I know you're a psychotherapist. So, how did your story unfold where you are now a shame expert?
Yes. So I grew up in a all white community, farming community, and I'm a Black woman. And that kind of started some of my racial identity shame. But when I was 15, I got pregnant, and I grew up also in a fundamental Christian home. And I got pregnant. My dad was a prominent doctor in the community, and my parents were basically like, this is not happening here. And so they sent me to a pregnancy home with the understanding that I would come back without a child, which I did. I left my daughter in Virginia and came back home and pretended like nothing ever happened. And in that process, in my grief, and in the whole process of just pretending like nothing had happened, I developed shame. Now, over time, that shame came to be what I now know to understand as complex shame, because over the course of the next few decades, as I held my story and didn't share and harmed myself in ways that I was running from my shame, um, I began to learn about what shame was, and I began to apply as a psychotherapist Brene Brown's tools about, processing shame by vulnerability and external compassion, and it did not work for me at all. And I began to do some research, and some other people were talking about, I've tried this kind of external compassion and vulnerability, it's not working. And so I began to question, what is this type of shame that's different? And that's how I came to understand that this shame is not alleviated by external compassion and vulnerability, and developed some tools for alleviating complex shame. So it was a combo of my own personal life, of my clients, and my research that got me to looking at this. And now I'm just very passionate about helping women especially understand the shame that exists in their life.
Oh my goodness. And Dr. Zoe, are you actively doing individual therapy, or what does your practice look like today?
Yeah, so I work completely remotely. I work with women all over the world, and I am actively doing psychotherapy in California. I'm licensed in California. Outside of California, I do coaching, whether it's relationship, life, career, that type of coaching, all kind of, centered around women's issues. And I write.
Mm. That's wonderful. We women need somebody like you to walk us through. And I do energy work and I do a lot of meditation. And it's so interesting because, in dealing with your day-to-day situations, your traumas from when you were little that you never really knew, first of all, if they were traumas or what to deal with them. But even like in today's day and age, when you get hurt or when there's some kind of situation, you kind of try to not think about it, not face it. You kind of like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. And what I have come to learn is that the way you are able to surpass that, and this is more of a simple, not a complex, but a simple shame per se, from what you explained, is the more you're able to feel that situation, more you're able to release it from your body, because all of that stuff accumulates in our body over time, and that's when disease happens. And but I just think it's so interesting that we as human beings, we try to avoid feeling all the ugly feelings, and really the way we grow and surpass them is by sitting in that feeling and feeling them, but we are not taught that. So I think that's really, really important. Do you agree with that? You're the professional.
100%. And what we do know is that shame, because shame is a type of trauma, it is housed in our body, just like you said. And you can see shame on people. You can see the slump of the shoulders, the downcast of the eyes. We can see it even just witnessing somebody else who feels shamed. And
Mhm.
you're right. Part of the maintenance process of getting rid of shame or continuing to keep shame out of your life has to also be a physical, um, kind of physical purging as well.
All right. Well, Dr. Zoe, right now we're going to have you back next week, and right now we have just set up the conversation. I want our listeners to know that next week we're going to really start talking about strategies on how to deal with shame, how to actually talk and speak up in the workplace, and we are going to have so much more to discuss. So, I will see you here next week and we will continue this amazing conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. Sounds good. We'll see you next week.
Okay, so that's the first half. I just need to mark it here. Okay. Okay, I think that was fantastic. So really great setup. Like we talked a lot about the challenges and stuff like that. And now we're going to talk about practical ways like that you work with your clients and all that good stuff. So ready to go?
Ready.
Okay, Dr. Zoe, I am so glad to have you back. Last week, we had a wonderful conversation. We set up the stage for why women hold themselves back, and we talked a lot about simple and complex shame. And this week, we're going to continue that conversation and really start giving our listeners the action items that they can do to start figuring out what to do with the shame. I found it very interesting that you shared that Brene Brown, she obviously talks a lot about shame and she gives you different things and ideas to do. And you identified a gap in her teachings that, just because you're vulnerable and you talk to people about it and you stop hiding the situation does not necessarily bring you, that peace, that closure, if you will. I don't know if there's closure on major traumas, but you have done a lot of work on yourself. You shared your amazing story and why you now decided to become a shame expert. Did I get all of that right?
Yes, that was perfect.
Okay, so today I want to start talking about practical ways that women can start showing up for themselves, start dealing with that shame. So why don't we start there?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to go back to the whole simple shame versus complex shame and Brene Brown. Brene Brown wrote an amazing foreword in Burke's book, which I can't remember the name of it right now. And Tarana explained this type of shame as well. And she said, I wasn't able to really help myself through your speaking about shame. And Brene Brown said, my research is solid. I know that my research is good, and what I found works. It makes sense. She said, but lived experience trumps research. And so
Mhm.
she even acknowledged that something's going on here. I don't know exactly what it is, but lived experience trumps research. And so that was really one of my biggest impetuses to really try to understand what's this different type of shame. And so your question is, okay, so if you listen to the prior episode, you can understand what shame is and that we all have shame. Not everybody has complex shame, but we all have shame. And so how do we rid it, especially when we do have complex shame out of our lives? And what we need to start to do is understand the toxic messages that shame is telling us. So shame always tells lies. The reason why is because it's attached to our identity as something that we are, which is not true. We are never wholly anything. And we have options to be and do something else. And so if we remember that shame always tells lies, that's number one, and shame always asks us to hide. Anywhere that you're trying to hide, that's how you can find shame. So you find shame anywhere in your life that you're hiding, whether you're hiding at work, whether you're hiding in relationships, whether you're hiding in your parenting, whether you're hiding from yourselves, which people do with addictions and things like that. And so anytime you have this feeling of, I don't want them to know,
Hmm.
I don't want them to find out, or I better not show. That's where your shame is. And so once you've identified your shame, then you want to start asking yourself questions. Where did these toxic messages come from? All shame messages are toxic. They are all unhealthy. And most of them came from, early in relationships, early in childhood, all those kinds of things. And what we think is that when we leave a situation that might not have felt so good to us, that when we leave, that we've left all the toxic messages. But what we actually do is we just pack them up, then we bring them with us, and then we repeat
Mhm.
them to ourselves. And so when you start to feel that sense of I want to hide, when you start to feel any negative emotion, sadness, anger, confusion, frustration, you need to ask yourself, what am I saying to myself? I will often ask clients to journal. Let's do a week, and just anytime you feel some of those negative feelings, just pay attention to what you're saying to yourself. They are often toxic messages. And so once we can start to understand what are we saying to ourselves, then we can ask the question, where did this come from? We can begin to test the reality of it, right? And then when it comes to shame, there's always blame. And so, what we want to do is start to untangle the blame from whatever happened. And the way that we do that is we begin to look at the thing for which we are blaming ourselves for. And sometimes it's something we have no control over. I have a crooked nose and I'm shamed about that, something like that, right? But what we want to do is untangle things for which we blame ourselves for and begin to take accountability for that. Now, the thing that's different about the work that I do is that, especially for victims of, who've been perpetrated against, we do not in therapy tend to blame them, right? We call that victim blaming, and it's not okay. But the problem is our brains do. And so
Right.
when we try to push against that in therapy, we have all this resistance. And so I say, let's work with it. Let's work with what your brain naturally does. Let's look at the blame that you put on yourself. Let's open it up. Let's talk about what you feel you may have done to yourself or what you were culpable for. Maybe you should have, maybe you feel like in those milliseconds you should have fought back, or you shouldn't have fought back, or you should have, done this, or whatever it is. Let's open that up. And when we begin to go ahead and say, okay, now how can you forgive yourself for this thing for which you blame yourself for? We're not talking about whether it's your fault or not. We don't even address that because that's not the way your brain works. Let's just talk about how you can forgive yourself. Now, I love the quote that forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. It's been attributed to a lot of people. I think most recently it's Lily Tomlin. Um, but it is so profound to me. Forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past because it's not attached to anyone. It's not attached to yourself. It's not attached to anybody else, a perpetrator, anything. It's just acknowledging and giving up the reality that the past could have been any different. And when you are able to simply say that, then now you can begin to untangle it from who you are as a person. Then you can begin to talk about it and receive some external validation. And if, especially for people who are marginalized in society and they're gaslit by their experiences, if you do not receive external validation, you've already validated yourself. And so you can begin to let the shame go. So those are some of the things that you can do. And then there's maintenance, because like I said in the last episode, we house our shame in our bodies. And so,
Mhm.
yes, we need to do these mental kind of psychological exercises. Yes, we need to talk about it, but we also need to purge it from our bodies. And so we house our shame in different places. And sometimes you can kind of pay attention. Where do I hold my shame? When you start to have a shaming experience, ask yourself, well, this is what I always do because shame never goes away. But for me, it comes and it goes through me, if that makes sense. So when
Yep.
shame shows up, I'm like, oh, I know what that is. That's shame. I feel it. And I ask myself, where am I feeling it in my body right now? And I will identify it. Maybe it's in my stomach, maybe it's in my neck or my head or my heart. And so once I identify it, I just acknowledge that it's there and I remind myself that it's telling a lie. And I try to imagine that I'm just watching it float by me like a river. Like I'm just standing at the
Mhm.
side of a river. Shame is there and it's floating by and it's going away. And when you identify it, number one, it doesn't feel so scary. And number two, you don't feel the desire to hide because I feel the shame. I acknowledge the shame and I'm still going to speak up because I know that that's a lie, right? I'm still going to do the behavior instead of hiding. So those are some of the practices. Go ahead.
Well, okay, so I have three things that I kind of want to bring up. First of all, you said to journal. Now, I think journaling is one of those things that, because I'm a coach and I do journaling as well, I think we just assume that everybody knows. So when you refer to journaling, can you just give like a 1 minute explanation of what does that entail? Because it's kind of like, in movies and shows, someone that doesn't believe in God, they're like, they're going to pray, but I don't know how type thing. So for journaling, what would look like for someone that's never done that before?
Right. So with that specific exercise, it's just literally writing down the words that you hear yourself say to yourself. That's it. When I'm mad, I hear myself saying, "You're stupid," or "You always do this," or whatever. I'm just asking you to simply write down those words. That's it. So you're right. Journaling is it's like a broad term. Um, I think that when we journal, we do want to know, like, what's the goal, right? So I journal at nighttime before I go to bed. The purpose of my journaling at night before I go to bed is to purge my thoughts so that I can sleep better. Because I'm going through the day, and this happens with a lot of women, especially who are busy, is that we distract ourselves all day long when our brains are trying to process something, especially emotional energy, right? And so then when we are finally quiet, laying in our bed, our brain is like, thank God, now I can focus on all this stuff. And our brains are just racing, racing, racing. Whereas if we would have allowed ourselves to have space and time to process the things, we wouldn't be sitting in bed with these racing thoughts. And so, although I'm not always so great during the day because my day is super busy, I make sure that at night, and I try to during the day as well, but I make sure at night that I'm specifically creating time to purge all the thoughts. And then before I go to bed, I remind myself, thought about that already. It's already on paper. I left it there. It'll be there in the morning. And then I can rest easier. But journaling can also play many other roles. It can play a role in helping you just kind of process information and kind of documenting your life and your time and your emotions. Journaling can be so many things, but all it is putting pen to paper or putting Apple Pen to Apple Pad to iPad or keyboard, whatever it is, however you do it. And also you can journal in an audio way as well. When I walk, I will often record myself talking, sometimes because I may want to use that for something else, but also it's just a way of processing and knowing that it's being witnessed, even it's just being witnessed by my Apple Watch. So journaling can take on so many forms.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad that I asked you that question because I journal in the morning. And I'm one of those people that when I lay down, because I'm an entrepreneur and a coach and I do so many different things, my brain is like, zzz. And so I'm going to change my journaling from doing it in the morning to at night because I can already feel how that's going to change. And then the second thing is that audio recording, because most people have some kind of smartphone. There's a voice recorded on there. You can just pop it on and then just dictate all of your information. And that would be huge because just to kind of get it out. I used to, when I started my personal development journey, it was 2007. I was going through a really bad divorce, and I took this class, is landmark education, and it was kind of like almost like a 4 day intense therapy, but they did an exercise where you would write your story down, and everybody's like feverishly writing down for like 30 minutes, and then you get paired up with a person and you read it and read it and read it until you're like, oh my gosh, this is so dumb. Why am I so focused on this one thing that happened 20 years ago or 10 years ago or even is happening now? And just doing that exercise alone, you're just like, so before Landmark, when I'd get a letter from my attorney because I was potentially going to lose my kids for custody, I was like always freaking out and whatever. And then after Landmark, I got a letter and it was like, oh, it's words on a piece of paper and that's not going to change the outcome. And it was such a transformative thing. So I'm glad that you talked about that journaling piece. So that was kind of the first thing that I wanted to clarify. The second thing And I think this is a little bit of the example that I had previously mentioned, where a young lady was saying, I speak up, but they don't really hear me. And you mentioned the word gaslighting. So, can you just explain a little bit what gaslighting is and then what you can do when you are gaslit?
Right. So, in simple terms, gaslighting is when someone else tells you that your experience didn't happen, isn't real, period. But I'll give you a little bit of backstory. So, gaslighting, that term, which is used a lot and not always accurately these days, it came from a 1950s, I believe, movie called Gaslight, I think. And in that movie, there was a husband who wanted to essentially get rid of his wife. And he did that by continually questioning her entire experience. So he would turn the lights off, and or it was actually a gas lamp at that time. And she would say, the light went off. And he's like, no, that didn't happen. And he would continually create experiences and then deny that those experiences were happening until she literally became psychotic. And he had to put her into a psychiatric at that time. You know, they had the psychiatric wards. He committed her. And that's how he got rid of his wife, by convincing her that her experience was not real. And so that's where the term comes from. And we do that in, it kind of in a microaggression kind of way in the world now. And sometimes we do that, in just a very overt way. Is that when someone expresses themselves and says that they're having an experience, or something's happening, and you completely tell them that didn't happen. You're even, a very subtle way is to be like, oh, you're overreacting. I'm sure that didn't happen.
Oh gosh, yes.
That is being gaslit. You're told that your experience didn't happen. And it's a very, it's just a very confusing mind state to put someone in when they have an experience, because there's not a lot to do with it when someone just completely denies it. And this happens for, so many, it happens for women. I mean, it can happen in so many different environments, and it is very damaging, very damaging.
I think one of the ways that appears to me most often is when a woman goes and talks to their manager and they're like, you know what, I want a promotion or a raise. And they're like, well, we have to wait till the annual review period, which is next year. So they're they're telling them, yeah, you deserve it, but not really, not until that time. So again, trying to kind of talk about ways that women can deal with it. And I always tell, a woman, listen, if your value is not being seen the way it should be, and it is, then it's time to leave the organization. If the only way you can move up is, waiting for the annual or for your boss to leave, then you need to go to somewhere where you have more room to grow. But I'd like to hear your opinion when I'm asking for the promotion and they're like, oh, sorry, you have to wait till, the review next year. What can somebody do in that situation?
Right. Yeah, it comes down to advocating for yourself, and which is hard to do when someone's already told you no, you have to wait. But what we don't often do is we will get a no, and then we just imagine and tell ourselves, well, that's it. Okay, now I just have to wait for a year. When the reality is that you can come back. You can, even if you left that meeting, right? And you went, to your office and you regrouped and you thought about it, you can come back and still make an argument for why you shouldn't wait for a year, right? The thing is, and I have to say, one of the most influential books I've ever read, and I'm very well read, is a book called Rejection Proof by Zhao Zhang. It's a simple book, and he did a TED talk on it. But what he did is he created a practice of seeking rejection for an entire year, of asking for things that he would probably be told no about. And of course, it transformed his life. And I mean, now he's a, multi-best-selling author. And it transformed my life, because we imagine that when we're told no, that that's it. And we also are so scared of a no, as if the no is going to do something to us. When the reality is that most men are way more persistent than women are, right? And will likely go back and have another conversation. And we tend to not do that. And so one of the things you can do is garner the strength, figure out your argument, figure out your why you should be able to have that review early or be considered early and go present it again. The worst they can say is no, and you will still be okay.
Yes, and I love that you say that because a lot of times women will come to me and they'll say, "Hey, Rosie, I really need you to help me gain confidence so that I can go advocate for myself." And I always tell them, "Listen, I can help you gain confidence, but it's through preparation, preparation, preparation." So, it's kind of like a tandem thing. It's not one or the other. And they are always so impressed with themselves on how much confidence they gain while doing, yeah, we work on the resume and the LinkedIn and all that stuff, but we talk about, again, crafting your script and being able to create your personal value proposition, like who you are, who you help, and how you help them, all of those pieces. And it's an extensive process when you're preparing for a job interview or a promotion. However, it works. And that confidence building is just such an incredible process. And so when you were saying, kind of go back and talk to your manager, you have to have your ammunition, right? You have to have all of your bullet points, all of your talking points, all of the proof that you are deserving of that promotion. But I love that you talked about the book, and I love that you're like, okay, so they said no, it's not the end of the world. And a lot of times we're like, oh my God, they said no, I got rejected. But that's a good segue to that rejection. And my third point that I was going to kind of go back to is that rejection, whether it's through whatever situation, it kind of sits in your body. So when you're sitting there and you're feeling that like ick in your body of that rejection, then I know you talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to know if I'm feeling that, what is my step that I do to deal with that?
Mhm. Well, the first thing I love what you said when women come to you and they said, can you help me with my confidence? And my answer would be, "Mm, I might be able to help you with your confidence, but what I can absolutely help you with is the behavior. I can help you figure out how to do the things, and I can help you with courage, which doesn't necessarily look like confidence. The
Right.
confidence gets built when you do the courageous thing, right? And so I can give you the steps, I can tell you the behavior, I can help you with courage, and the confidence comes later. Often we wait for the confidence, and the
Yeah.
confidence never happens, and then we don't do the thing. The confidence is actually the byproduct. So I just wanted to address that. Um,
Yes.
I always do this. I'm sorry, I forgot your question.
It was like the body, like when you're sitting and feeling that rejection in your body, like what's your next step?
Yeah, so when you're feeling that rejection, which actually gets attached to shame, I am not worthy, I'm worthless. You want to do the same thing that I talked about is recognize, oh, this is shame. Rejection doesn't feel good. Give yourself some compassion. Like, it doesn't feel good. This feeling does not feel good. How can I get it out of my body? Now, what we know from research is the best way to get shame trauma out of your body is a combination of talking and moving. What you
Mm-hmm.
want to do is if you can take some time, if you can take a lunch break, if you can take a bathroom break, go walk, move your body and talk it out. In the same way we just talked about with the journaling, the best way to get these types of negative emotions out of your body is a combo of moving and talking at the same time. I will also, especially if panic starts to rise up in these kinds of situations, I will ask women to go into the bathroom and do jumping jacks. Because what happens is when we feel panic, it's our body telling our brain telling our body, you're in danger. And so we need to run or we need to fight. And so cortisol and epinephrine, like all these chemicals start to just kind of, rise in our body. And the best way to get them out is through movement. Just go into a stall and do 10 jumping jacks and remind yourself that you're safe, that you're okay, that rejection isn't going to kill you.
Wow, that lion or that tiger or bear isn't going to come and grab you. But oh my gosh, that is so insightful. And the thing is that it's so simple. Just talk it out and move, and that makes such a huge difference. One other thing that I just kind of wanted to ask you, sometimes people literally hide. And what I mean by that is that they either don't want to turn their Zoom camera on, or they don't want to like go into the office because they don't want to be seen for whatever reason. And I understand that that's part of shame. It could be like social anxiety. It could be anything like that. So how would you coach somebody to start working on recognizing that? Because that is an absolute like hiding tactic.
Right. And social anxiety is also tied to shame. It's amazing how so many things are tied to shame, right? The sense of something's wrong with me, people are going to see it, and I feel vulnerable, and we don't want to feel vulnerable in that way. You know, it's a practice once again, and it's like a lens practice and then an actual physical practice. And it's hard when you've had this long-standing feeling of I'm not good enough. What we need to understand as humans is that we are way more critical of ourselves than other people are of us. And that humans are attracted to, we are naturally attracted to other human faces.
Mm-hmm.
If you are going to create any kind of positive experiences, you're going to do it with someone seeing your face. And we do not, as humans, expect perfection. In fact, what we have found is that people feel less connected to humans who look perfect than they do to humans who don't. And your experience, if you think about when you scroll, if you think about people you listen to, if someone seems very perfect and they're up there and they're talking, you are not actually going to believe or listen to them as much as you would someone who maybe looks a little like you. Maybe looks like your everyday person, has some flaws, has some crooked teeth or gray hair, whatever the thing is that you're feeling self-conscious about. And so it's really getting yourself into a brain state of understanding that you being willing to put yourself out there is the self-care, is the superpower that will allow you to get the things that you want. When you actually think it's the opposite, I better hide because I don't want them to see, where the reality is you better show up because in seeing you, people connect with you.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. Okay, so we are obviously coming down to time here, but I would like for you to talk to us a little bit about your book and what the name of your book is and where people can find you.
Yes. So the name of my book is Stronger in the Difficult Places, same name as my podcast. It is available every single place you could possibly buy a book. You can find me on Instagram at Dr. Zoe Schott, and my website as well, and LinkedIn, all the places. It's Dr. DrZoeShaw. And my book, Stronger in the Difficult Places, it really helps a woman understand complex shame, how it's shown up in her life, and 8 steps to getting rid of it from her life.
I love that so much. Well, Dr. Zoe, thank you so much. This has been to me a very insightful conversation, and people can actually take these simple practices that you provided us and implement them today. So thank you so very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Here's the thing that I cannot stop thinking about. Shame has one job, and it's to make you hide. And hiding at work does not look like hiding. It looks like waiting for a better moment. It looks like softening or hedging a sentence. It looks like someone else saying the thing that you already knew you could have said. So, what's the answer? Typically, we wait to feel confident before we act. Dr. Zoe flips that order on us. She recommends that you act and the confidence shows up after. It is a byproduct, not the ticket in. So this week, pick the one thing you have been putting off until you feel ready. The idea that you have not said out loud, the money conversation, the project you want to lead. Pick one and do the smallest version of it. One sentence, one ask. Before you feel ready, do it. So I just want to thank Dr. Zoe for sharing all of her incredible wisdom. All of her information is going to be in the show notes. And if courage is not your problem, but knowing what to say is, I built a free Impact Clarity AI coach tool to put your work, the work that you already do, into language that leadership recognizes and rewards. It's free, and the link is going to be in the show notes as well. So with that, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.